The Alwin property is located about 1 mile west of downtown Mound, Minnesota. The first thing that you will notice after turning left or south onto Robin Lane is a home being remodeled on the right. This is the Alwin family home that was built in 1912 and moved to this location after the Alwin property was sold to a developer in 2000 and all the new homes were built. Heading south on Robin Lane will bring you to the intersection of the appropriately named Sugar Mill Lane and Robin Lane. On your left is the Rex Alwin Park. Turning to the right, you will soon come upon the intersection of Alwin Circle and Sugar Mill Lane. Let's talk about the Alwin family history, how they arrived in Mound, Minnesota, and the uses of the Alwin property. Wilhelm Alwin Sr. was born in Germany in 1825. Wilhelm was Rex Alwin's great-grandfather. He emigrated to America, first living in Milwaukee, Wisconsin in 1854, then moved to the little German town of New Ulm, Minnesota in 1855. Wilhelm and his wife lived in their prairie schooner for several months, where their son was born, before moving to a cozy dugout that was constructed by Wilhelm in an embankment. They then built the Alwin farm on the Cottonwood River, a mile and a half southwest of New Ulm. They had 9 children, all born at New Ulm. Wilhelm accepted employment at Fort Ridgely. He cleared the ground of his homestead, turned it into fields of grain, and in time made the wilderness yield an abundance of food. One of Wilhelm's 9 children was Albert J. A.J. Alwin. He and his wife Elizabeth Ann moved to Mound, Minnesota in 1912, the same year that Mound was incorporated. The Alwin home that A.J. built was one of over 400 styles of Sears Craftsman kit homes available by catalog between 1908 and 1940. It was delivered on the train that passed through Mound. Since A.J. worked in Minneapolis, and since the Alwin farm bordered the railroad tracks, A.J. convinced the train conductor to pick him up each day at the farm for his trip to Minneapolis, instead of having to go to the Mound Depot 1 mile east. Farming the land without modern farming equipment was backbreaking work, as shown here in the 1930s. A.J. tapped some of the maple trees and produced maple syrup. One of A.J.'s children was Leroy V. Alwin Sr., the father of Rex Alwin. Leroy Sr. grew up in New Ulm, became a writer and moved to San Diego, where he wrote books about Indian history and metaphysics. He moved back to Mound at the urging of his father, A.J. Leroy was the Mound city clerk. During the 1930s Depression, he had to pass out government relief checks of $1.75 per week. Leroy Sr. had an apiary business called Waldheim Apiary and was the beekeeper for many beehives of honeybees. Leroy Sr. and wife Norma were the second generation of Alwin to live on the property. They had 2 children, Rex and Sid. Rex Alwin, whose full name is Leroy V. Alwin, Jr., was born on September 23, 1931, and was the firstborn. The Alwin property was very large and provided lots of play area for the neighborhood kids. It also came with lots of chores, including haying. A budding engineer at age 14, Rex made this train out of scrap wood and junk he found around the property and neighborhood. Rex was a 1949 graduate of Mound Consolidated High School, where he was active with the class play, the Mohian Yearbook, the Mohian Play, Orchestra, and Band, with Brother Sid. Pictured here are the second and third generation of Alwin to call this beautiful property their home. Rex and wife Barb were married in 1972 and had 2 children, Betsy and Anthony. Now let's take a look at some of the uses of the Alwin property. Maple syrup and sugar are among the oldest agricultural commodities in the United States. The art of maple tapping was started by the Native Americans. The importance of maple products for local trade was established well before the arrival of the early pilgrims to America in 1620. Maple trees remained the prime source of sugar until the Civil War, after which cane sugar gained widespread acceptance. Rex's grandfather A.J. had tapped some of the maple trees on the Alwin farm. In the late 50s and early 60s, Rex decided to start a maple syrup operation on a grander scale. The old chicken coop, barn, and hayloft would be converted into a sugar house. The sugar house was later the backdrop for two works by artist Terry Redlin. From 1966 through 1987, Rex knew just about everybody in the maple industry. He headed up the North American Maple Council in 1976 and 1977. He spoke a lot about the industry, used models in his talks, had lots of visitors to his farm, and referred to his Sugarwood farm as being the nation's most publicized maple sugar farm. In the old days, maple trees would be tapped, a collection spout inserted, then pails or bags would be attached to capture the sap. There was constant maintenance, and it was backbreaking work hauling the sap. Tapping season in Minnesota generally runs from 4 to 6 weeks starting in mid-March. Taps would typically be inserted 2 to 4 feet above ground and 3 inches deep. Rex aggressively moved to automation starting in the late 1950s. Rex, a professional engineer, developed one of the first fully automated sugar bush systems in the country. By 1962, he had some 7,000 feet of plastic tubing from tapping 300 trees within a 1,000-foot radius of a central gathering tank. The sap was then pumped to the sugar house, where it flowed through 2 evaporators heated by a wood fire. He later updated his cooker to have automated controls and a furnace. About 35 minutes after entering the first evaporator, the sap would have been converted into maple syrup. So essentially, the process of producing maple syrup is one of concentrating the sugar solution to a predetermined level through evaporation. Heat is what is used to concentrate the sap and develop the maple color and flavor. It takes 35 to 40 gallons of sap to produce 1 gallon of syrup. In 1962, 5,000 gallons of sap was converted into 135 gallons of maple syrup. This operation was a lot of work and was a hobby, not a money-making operation. As Rex stated that year, the maple syrup industry is one of a very precarious nature. The sap flow in maple trees is primarily a function of temperature. If the weather is not proper, the yield can vary as much as 500%. An extremely prolonged cold spring season with alternate thawing and freezing is best. Rex used to joke that on rainy days he was an engineer and on other days he was a farmer. Rex's wife Barb explained in 1987 that the land was still basically a primeval forest and hadn't really changed much for hundreds of years, except for all the flowers, of course, and the maple syrup operation. Barb was a gardener at heart, The Alwin farm grew flowers and nursery stock that was sold daily throughout the season at the farmers market in downtown Minneapolis. She grew wildflowers, lady slippers, exotic and ordinary varieties of iris and daisies, peonies, and much more. At least once a week, Barb made the trip to the market to sell her treasures.